Hey, this is Neil Fallon, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
Yes, you are, and we are fired up to have Neil Fallon on the show. Neil Fallon is the lead singer of a band called Clutch, and if you're not working out to Clutch, you're not working out hard enough. That's what I say. Clutch is the band that everybody who's ever been in a band wants to be in. I'll be honest with you, Neil. I was not that familiar with Clutch. And then Damian suggested that we have you on the show. And I was like, well, let me check these guys out. And I figured out that you guys are my heroes, man.
Well, shucks.
You have the best setup for our audience. If you're familiar with Clutch, you already know what's going on. If not, here's the deal. Your band has been together since 1991.
Mm-hmm.
You've been able to make a living playing music with your buddies. All this time, same lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkable. The band hails from Frederick. You guys are from Maryland, right?
Yeah, right now we're based out of Frederick, Maryland.
Frederick, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And how often do you get out to the West Coast? Because I don't think often enough.
Well, we were just out there in, was it September, November with the Dropkick Murphys.
Yeah.
We do go out there pretty regularly, and we were supposed to be out there, I think, right about now.
Yeah.
But we're not. So we hit the West Coast usually two times a year.
Okay.
Something, it really depends, what's going on. If we're having the album just came out, if we're, things are petering out, thinking about another album. So it's a big world. It's tough to get everywhere.
Yeah.
We were talking with Damian off mic, and he and I were saying that the next time you come to Greece, he wants you to pop north to North Macedonia, which is actually right next to Greece. But and he's going to set up a venue and get you guys to play there. So we're already going to put you to work up, and you come out all the way out to Greece. You may as well take a little hour trip north and play there as well. So we want more out of you guys. I guess what we're saying.
We're all about it. It's that's one of the great things about being in a band is traveling and going to see these places that you never dreamed of, and meeting people in the tourist circuit. You meet people in a real way, make friends from around the world, and have a good time while doing it. So sign us up.
So this is a strange time to be in a band, especially in a band that, like you guys, have really gathered your fan base on the road, touring all the time. What do you see moving forward? I mean, I hate to jump right to that question, but we kind of got to knock this topic out. Where are you guys pointed?
Let's get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah.
Well, I think in our case, our fan base was built up for one, word of mouth and just grinding it out on the road. I think sometimes a band, if they have a huge hit right out of the gates, that's the worst thing that could happen to them, because their expectations get set really high. And it's a very bitter pill to swallow when things start getting reduced. But if you have this mindset of you're happy to be at the show, no matter how many people are there, it's like the analogy I always use. It's like you can build a house out of sticks or stones. It takes longer to build it out of stones, but it's going to be there long after you're gone. So for us, trying to adapt for this has been a learning curve. We've set up turning our jam room basically into a studio now, a video studio. And I've spent the last 2 weeks learning OBS and
yes.
Yeah.
Can you teach me?
I'm the last person you want to talk to. But the reaction that we got from some very brief streams was phenomenal. It is odd singing to a laptop, but I think people enjoy the interaction, and that's what I think people miss most. And it's not just us, it's having their girlfriend or their buddy next to them, spilling drinks on each other and having a good time and forgetting about life for a while. This is as close as it can get for them as well as us. And I think that's going to be going on for a while. Having said that, even when things go back to out on the road, I think we'll probably continue with the streaming, because to be honest, look, I'm 48. I've had a very get off my lawn attitude about the whole thing for many, many years. So now that I've learned more about it and the band's learned more about it, I think we're okay with it. We've kind of warmed up to it as a concept. So I guess that's a silver lining to this mess, I guess.
I mean, it's better than being left behind by the marketplace. That's for sure. just to poke a little bit of fun at someone like Gene Simmons, who's always shaking his fist at, the advances. The reality is this is what you have to do if you're going to be a relevant band. You guys have built a worldwide audience, but you're also still growing. You're not putting new albums out because you guys are bored with putting out music and finding fans,
At the end of the day, the fundamentals of it are the same. We enjoy playing music together, the four of us, and we enjoy playing music for people. And it's really quite that simple. Everything else is secondary and subordinate to that. I think with rock bands in particular, there's a tendency to have arrested development intellectually, and to think you're perpetually 21 years old and the world should rotate around you. But things will change whether you like it or not. I asked my son, is it weird for me to tell people on YouTube to hit the subscribe button? And he was like, why would it be weird? That's all he's heard his whole life.
Yeah.
I guess it will I see an analogy sometimes for a lot of bands that hated when music videos became a huge thing, and you can see the bands that embraced it and the bands that didn't. We've always had a problem warming up to that. We did okay with it. But I see an analogy in this situation.
When you look at the thing like selling out versus remaining relevant and doing things like hit the subscribe button, what other barriers are there for you where you're like, I just have to get over it. The band just has to get over it. This is how you do music nowadays. I mean, you've got to promote a Spotify channel. Maybe you guys have a SoundCloud account. You have YouTube, all these different platforms that if you don't promote, heck, no one else is gonna.
Yeah, you have to do it yourself. And I find, we've in the 90s, we were signed to major labels after having started ourselves. And then that went away around 2000 and we started again. And this is kind of a repeat. This is sort of like the third cycle for us where it's, getting back in the mental van. And no one's going to hold your hand and show you how to do it. I mean, I've tried instructional videos on YouTube, and that's a nightmare. Oh. The only way you can do it is just like dive right in and not be afraid to make the mistakes. I mean, the first time we did a stream was accidental, and for 15 minutes, people just saw my grill up against the screen like this, trying to figure it out. That's the way it has to happen, as far as I'm concerned.
Your audience too seems to be the kind of audience that would get a kick out of, here's Neil figuring it out.
Oh, I quickly became a meme. I think it was the face of every dad trying to check into Google Classroom, which I can also relate to.
Let's roll back to basics though, and talk about songwriting, because when you've had the, long prolific career that you guys have enjoyed, what is songwriting like for you now that, how different is it from what it was back when you first started? Because you guys have always been an ass-kicking good time band.
Well, thank you. I think at its core, it's exactly the same. We get together and someone says, I have a riff, and we'll play it and it'll change. And then it'll morph, and over the weeks or months, it's hard to tell who wrote what. My favorite bands are the bands that are like the sum is greater than the parts.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope we are. We don't have a sense of ownership where it's like, this song is going to be exactly the way I want it. And JP, you got to play this beat and you got to do this. No, that's no fun, because it's sort of like DOA. I think the joy of doing something collectively creative is it becomes something you did not expect. So that's true to this day. I think the other part is you always got to look at it as an education. I took my first vocal lesson about 1.5 years ago. I wish I had done it about 20 years ago, but unless you challenge yourself, you're not going to have your vocabulary is not going to grow in any field, and music's no different.
Well, what makes a guy who's made a living with a microphone in his hand for nearly 30 years finally take a vocal lesson?
I was blowing my voice out suddenly, and I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. Don't go out to the bar, go to bed, drink lots of water, don't act like you're 19, and it was still giving me a lot of issues. And this gentleman by the name of Pete Strobel, who had been a vocal coach out in LA, for some reason decided to retire in Baltimore, which is lucky for me.
Yeah.
And he changed the game for me. And it was all about just doing some simple warm-ups to basically treat your vocal cords like a muscle, the way any athlete would warm up before a competition. And you got to treat the show like that way in mindset. You want the last show to be just as good, if not better, than the first show, and not limping your way to the finish line. And that was really my reasoning behind it.
So he taught you to be an endurance athlete.
A little bit. You know, he told me that, you know, my breathing was right. You know, it was more about the truth of the matter is that the exercises, you got to push your falsetto range, which seems counterintuitive because of the way I sing. But if you can get up to this note and sustain it, it's pretty easy to get up to this note and have it be a cakewalk and feel good about it instead of struggling.
When in the songwriting thing, when you've been around for as long as you guys have, it's easy for a band to, you know, just write songs. We're just going to write songs. They put them out. You know, often like the best songs from a band come out when they were 18, when they were in the van trying to figure it out. And later on, either we get bored with it or something is missing from those magic moments. You guys have managed to put out consistently good material. I'm positive that you think you're still getting better as a songwriter, and I agree. But what is it that separates bands that continue to make music that matters versus bands that make things because this is what they do? They write songs.
Honesty and sincerity. Okay. If someone got into this thinking this is my ticket to be rich and famous and meet a lot of girls, you might get a taste of that, but chances are you're just setting yourself up for disappointment and failure. But if what you truly enjoy is the creative process, that's all you need. And, you know, it's great to make a living at this because to be honest, I took it for granted for many years because this was not a dream of mine. I just kind of stumbled upon it and treated it disrespectfully. And then when I came to an age where I realized, okay, well, now a family's in the picture, is this viable? And we rolled the dice again. And once I did that, it was kind of liberating. I was like, well, you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my grave doing this. And suddenly I became much more respectful of it, much more defensive about it, took it much more seriously. Not that the first shows I just phoned in. I just kind of thought, well, maybe next year it'll be over. I guess the expression, you know, when you hear, if you do something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, I hate that expression.
Yeah. If you do something that you love, you work your ass off to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And I think we do collectively feel the same way.
That's the theme, really. I think when we have guests whose work we admire, we always come back to that. And the reason that we tend to gravitate to admiring, you know, people who've had a nice, long, sincere body of work is because of exactly that factor. You know, you've been called upon at times in your life where you got to turn it on, and you find it. And you find it because you love it and you continue to love it. And when you have a group of guys who've been together like you have, is one of the things I look forward to pointing out to our audience is that you guys, like every other band, have had periods where you push away from the band to do a different exploration, you know, like a solo project, but you always end up employing each other in your solo projects. So I think that's an indicator, man, that you have, you know, that you found a chemistry that you know what really matters and what not to take for granted in this. Is that true?
It is. You know, just for practical purposes, a lot of that instrumental stuff that we do is because John, Paul, Tim, and Dan write way more music than I could ever possibly write lyrics to. And, you know, sometimes it's a good exercise for me to learn how to shut my mouth and say what I need to say on guitar. I wasn't, guitar was new to me when this band started, and I'm still, figuring that out. It's
like, come on, guys, you keep running music. I'm running out of towns in Texas.
Yeah. Thank God for atlases.
Rhyming dictionary and a Thompson guide.
I got one right here.
Look at that. You got to be a certain age to get that joke. Hey, just sidebar. Do you know Ryan Sickler?
Ryan Sickler.
Yeah, he's a comedian, but he's from Baltimore, and he's around our age. So
it's quite possible, but I live in a cocoon.
Yeah, I imagine. We're both kind of grinding, and but
when I get home from tour, it drives my wife crazy. I don't want to go anywhere, and she want to see a band. I'm like,
yeah.
But I have to cave to keep everyone happy.
What about when you guys were coming up? Did you bump into either Henry Rollins or Dave Grohl at all as you guys were, playing the small joints? Because we're all the same age.
Yeah. Well, we were very lucky growing up in DC because the scene in DC was incredible, and I was naive thinking, okay, this is our local scene. This is what every city must be like, having Minor Threat and Bad Brains and Fugazi and
right.
But no, that wasn't the case. And I only later on realized how lucky we were. And believe it or not, Fugazi was a huge influence. Musically, they might be a lot different, but those guys would go into any venue, community center, church, fluorescent lights, no bar, no merch, and they would burn the house down every single time. And it really left an impression on us that we only realized later. I met Rollins only later on. I'm a few years younger than that generation, except my parents wouldn't let me get on the Metro to go see Minor Threat because I was, 13.
Yeah.
So it was, but it's amazing. Like when you hit 16, 17, all of a sudden you're like, no, you're not stopping me. And then you go see those shows. But yeah, and I met Dave Grohl. Actually, I saw his old band Scream at the 930 Club well before he joined Nirvana. And man, I saw so many great bands in that club and some other clubs in the area at the time.
What made DC such a hotbed for that? Because I figured you had to be influenced by that just by your timing. I mean, yeah, you can't avoid Fugazi or any of these other bands. And if I'm saying just one name, there are so many from that area from that time. But what made the DC sound, and I'm including Virginia, Maryland in that, what made it so popular 20 years down the road?
It's hard to say. Sometimes there's just something in the water. Mm-hmm. New York, of course it's punk rock and metal scene and new wave, but it's so big. I think it was kind of it's to its own detriment. Whereas DC is a smaller city, and I think it was easier to kind of become its own voice. And I kind of look back at that time as the Clutch is the product of three scenes, and that was the DC punk rock scene, the Maryland doom metal scene. And then there's another scene, the DC go-go scene, which that rhythm and swing played a big part in John Paul's drumming.
For sure.
So we kind of are in the middle of that triangle.
Yeah. Well, I want to just shout out John Paul because I'm a drummer. And, as I listen to Clutch records, man, I love John. I love DC Sound Attack. I love Chuck Brown. And you guys have you guys take Chuck Brown influence.
Yeah,
so there's
to this day we used him as intro walk-on music.
Yeah. So, to carry on to what you're saying about New York, it's so big and there's so much there that you can ignore influences. And DC is the kind of scene where it's like everything's right there. You got to soak it all up. You got to take it all in.
Yeah, and it was I never really understood the kind of motivation for bands to move to New York and LA. I mean, I guess maybe that's why the record labels and that's what you're supposed to do, but so many would get lost in the shuffle, whereas the labels were looking to places like DC or Minneapolis or Kansas City for these bands
that had a scene
that did have its own unique voice. And of course, DC being DC, there was always that politically charged energy because it was right there. And I think that was, you couldn't get that in that kind of potency anywhere else.
Yeah. I saw Gavin DeGraw one time was talking about moving to New York. And he said that I moved to New York and everybody was moving to New York around me, and they were moving to New York to get signed.
Yeah.
And I wanted to move to New York to get good.
Yeah. I think that's a fair statement. There are musical meccas throughout the world, and then there's New York, there's Austin, there's Nashville, there's Seattle. I think some towns just foster an arts movement. And it's always usually the typical process where the artists can't afford much. So they have to, by default, move to the not so great section of town.
Yeah.
And then the artists, being artists, make that a very appealing place with artwork and music. And then that attracts other people. And then the rent starts going up. So then the artists have to flee somewhere else to another city. And I remember in DC, half of my music friends are moving to Austin in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And it's almost like sort of like this chasing one's tail in a way.
And you're describing what's happening to Austin right now.
Yeah. Austin, I think, kind of reached critical mass. I mean, I don't even recognize it. I remember, it's still cool. Don't get me wrong. But I remember going there for the first time thinking, man, I want to move here. This is a weirdo's paradise.
A weirdo's paradise. But, you can look back at, when Memphis kind of, it's people don't look to Memphis anymore.
Memphis is an incredible town.
It is. It's still incredible.
Yeah. There's Minneapolis, often overlooked. Spokane. It's in Portland. That's another one. And these things exist in every small town in America too. It's harder to see, but you gotta look under the hood. There's good stuff here.
Yeah.
The good stuff. How do you find inspiration? I know the fellas give you music and you try to find the words, but how do you find the good stuff? Jesus on the Dashboard's a great fucking line. That's once you hear that, you're instantly in that car. My buddy Mike LePerry had a Galaxy 500, and that song didn't exist when we were kids. But once you had it, you put me in that car, and then you attached a Jesus on there. Where is that good stuff these days?
Oh, wow. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with being a good listener. And I think, in the 90s, I used to walk around with a notepad, a 3M little like reporter's notepad.
Yeah.
Now I have a cell phone, and I can either type it down real quick or gibberish. And I find the best stuff comes first thing in the morning or last thing at night. I think it has something to do with the brain, like being closer to the dream state. But a lot of the best stuff I've just heard out of context and just try to if I like one line or two lines, then just try to build a world around it. And I'd rather not have all the answers to a song. I'd if all the mystery's taken out, and if it's just about a breakup with a girlfriend or Neil's bad day, it's kind of boring, revisiting that. But if there's a mystery and a fiction to it, then not only can a listener put their perspective into it, like your car that you're talking about. So you're not wrong. And there's feast and famine. There's sometimes where it could be so frustrating. I think I'm done. Like I should just retire and throw in the towel. And then usually when I stop pulling my hair out and just doing something mindless, like pulling the weeds out in the backyard, a thought will come in my head, and then I'm scrambling to write it down. And then it's the most fulfilling feeling in the world, thinking, wow, that's cool. And I can't wait to share it with people.
Do you have any stories that germinated for like a long, long time before they finally became a song? Is it something where your process is, you go to the book or you go to your notes and you got to get it out quickly? Or do you have those tales that kind of just lingered for a long time that eventually became a song?
I would say the vast majority of songs that I think have get played the most during our sets of the songs that were written the quickest.
Oh,
Sort of like when the words just kind of come out like a torrent. Sometimes it can be difficult. There are occasions where I've had an idea and I'll put it down on paper almost like a poem and just let it sit there waiting to hear the music that matches the movie that's going on through my head. That's one of the cool things about being in a band is you get to listen to the instrumental music and close your eyes and say, and describe that movie in words. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. But one example is on the last record, the title song Book of Bad Decisions. Those were lyrics I wrote years prior to it ending up in a song. I was just waiting for the right mood. And when those guys played that riff, I was like, there it is. And it was pretty easy to write.
You talked on another interview about using covers to find inspiration and to change things around. Do you ever look at covers and say, or look at a song and say, we should cover this, but from a totally new perspective? I'm not talking just like, do a new arrangement. I mean, like maybe even write the opposite view from that song, just to kind of take the cover thing and really push it out there.
Well, thanks for the idea. We will now.
You're welcome. You know what they should have done.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. I think covers are good because you get into the brain of a stranger. Like, for example, we covered ZZ Top's Precious and Grace.
Yeah.
And we heard it so many times growing up, you're almost deaf to it. You're like, oh, that's an easy song. It's not an easy song. And once you get into the headspace, you're learning in a way. But that's cool, writing the perspective, of a character that's in the song. And maybe the villain isn't the villain. Maybe it's the other way around. And the possibilities are endless. I like that. And again, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think about that because like Nancy Sinatra, when she was going to sing These Boots Are Made for Walking, her dad was going to sing it. She's like, you can't sing that song. It's cruel when you sing it. And so like I always thought, like, what if you look at a lot of songs that way, or even just the opposite version, like the person being walked on and you sang, the call and response to it. It's just such a powerful storytelling thing.
I heard when you made it a song about liberation.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes, she did.
Yeah, it's a classic, and I can't imagine her father doing it.
Yeah, it would have just been a song about an asshole. Yeah. One of my favorite covers is Michelle and Dege Ocello did Who Is He and What Is He to You?
Oh, really?
She sang it just like that, but the lesbian dynamic, like what are you looking at him about, made it kind of a different song. So that was kind of cool. But the thing that you mentioned about your ability to write songs and that you've gotten, you guys have done it for so long that you have a bigger toolkit, I'm sure now, that just, things kind of come to you, and you've been saving riffs and you've been saving lyrics in a book, just like the guys have been saving riffs, and those things kind of come together. One of the reasons that I thought about Ryan Stigler is not because he's from Baltimore, but because he's a comedian, and we have a lot of comedians on the show too. You guys have a comedian's kind of process. I don't know if you know this, but most comedians, they just churn all the time. They're always in the book. They're always making notes. They're always kind of seeing the world through their lens, and then they take it onto the stage and they work it out.
I can understand that. I mean, it's the creative process is you can't just wait for it to fall out of the sky. It's work. And for every one good idea, you have to come up with 20 shitty ones.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, a lot of times something sounds great in your head and you bring it on stage and you walk off like, no. Especially in the studio, we found very early on, if you write something in the studio, it's the performance one, you're not doing it so well because you're just trying to remember the parts. 2, it can sound great because it's new. And 3, you can do a lot of trickery. You can, triple guitars, double the vocals, what have you. And then you bring it on stage and break it down. It doesn't really translate. So what we always do is when we can is play these songs on the road over and over again before we get into the studio, because it's a completely different animal.
Yeah. Performance is different.
Which songs have moved the most for you from their inception and recording in the studio, 10, 20, 1 year later, and you're like, totally different song now?
That's a good question. I would say the first one that comes to mind is Space Grass.
Okay.
The one you mentioned. We re-recorded that a few months back because one, it had changed. It's faster. I know I sing it better, much better. John Paul says he plays the drums better. I know I understand when people think that's almost sacrilege for any band to re-record the original because that's what people are used to. In band world, that's called demoitis. It's like when you make your demo and you fall in love with it, and when you go to record the real thing, it's never as good as the demo. And I understand that. But for us, we were like, well, this is kind of how we play it now. Same with Electric Worry. It's a lot different. Just by both those songs are written in the studio, and putting it through the crucible of stage after stage after stage. Suddenly we're playing off each other in ways we never would have been capable of when we were looking at a clock, wondering how many dollars per hour we're spending trying to record this thing and trying to just get it done like that.
As fans, we should get excited about that, that re-recording.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, sure. Some of them are. It's a very visceral reaction. It's either, oh, this is great, or what the hell are you guys doing? And it's also, to be completely transparent, we never did solely digital releases, and we wanted to do stuff that wasn't new because we didn't know how the digital release would pan out. Would people like it? Would people even know about it? Because rock and roll fans, particularly fans like us, they still love physical, albums, CDs. And I understand, but this is also adapting to the future. I mean, I think musicians and music fans hang out with each other, so we think everybody is an audiophile. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, the majority of people just don't care. Yeah. They're happy to listen to these terrible Sony earbuds through their phone, and we have to provide for that while at the same time never abandoning, things like high fidelity. There's room for all these things.
Yeah, the people with the cheap headsets get to go back to Mike LePerry's Galaxy too.
Let's talk about the future a little bit, though, because you guys have toured with ZZ Top. I remember, maybe a couple of decades ago.
You guys toured with ZZ Top?
No, we never toured with ZZ Top.
Oh, I thought you guys did.
You should oughta.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind that part. Okay.
If they knew what was good for them.
But I'd like where you're going with that.
And there are so many bands that have done this for a long time, and they're still out there. Rolling Stones, ZZ Top still hits the road from time to time. U2 is still out there. A lot of bands that have been playing for 40, 50 years now. Does that look like a future for Clutch? Do you think you guys will continue to go? And then if so, will the music be so visceral? And that's how I'm going to call you music, visceral, working out music, or is it changing already?
To answer your first question, yes, as long as I'm physically capable of doing it, this is what I'm going to do. And, those bands that you mentioned, they're not going out on the road for the money. I mean, I can't imagine they are. They're going out on the road because they like it. I think they just get bored when they're sitting at home. I mean, what Mick Jagger's thinking, oh, I need to pay the rent.
Yeah.
No. The man had a heart attack. He's got a 2-year-old child, and he's doing, a dancing workout routine so he can get back out on the stage and behave just as he did in 1970. And that's badass.
Yeah.
And the older you get, the more you have to take care of your body. I'm in much better. I could outrun my 1991 version of myself, as far as like stamina goes. And you have to do that because music is a physical thing. And if you don't take care of this, there's no way you're going to be able to execute what you need to. And as far as visceral, sure. I mean, things will get toned down. I mean, you can't expect backflips. I never did those in the first place. But I think the sincerity is in the delivery. It doesn't have to be how am I saying this? I think one of the things that Clutch never did was kind of depend on like the guitar player spinning the guitar around his neck and myself jumping out into the crowd. Never did that. So people aren't expecting it, thank God, because it's not going to happen.
Well, I think one of the things that, I mean, you should be an act that goes on the road with a band like ZZ Top, but not because of the spinning the guitar around, but because you guys are organically pretty similar in the fact that, oddly, you like to write songs about Texas, but just that they're the same kind of band in that they've been loyal to each other. They have the same kind of organic process. They take stuff around the road and put it through the crucible, just like, like you described. And I think that that's the audience that, that has found them year after year. And it's the audience that's found you after year, and it all matches up.
And one of the things that rock and roll, so I've only learned until now, is that, like, sometimes you get it pam into your head. It's like, oh, you're too old for this. Like, this is a young man's game. And I kind of see it as the opposite. Like, if you can look back and say, I made a living and I still could make a living 30 years, that's unimaginable. It's a blessing. And most bands, sure, they might be very intense and burn out brightly. That happens. Sometimes fate just hands them a bad hand. Sometimes it's self-inflicted. But to be able to say, like the Rolling Stones doing this for 50 years,
man,
come on, that's awesome. And that's kind of the way I look at it. And I think we have a lot of fans that have grown up with us. I've met fans that, a young man and a young woman met at our show, fell in love, got married. Now they bring their kids to our show and they're old enough to know the lyrics. To me, that's amazing. That's not dating anyone. That's a legacy. And
that's right.
I hate when labels refer to bands as legacy acts. It's sort of like, okay, that here comes the blue plate special. It's no. Yeah. Hey, shit, if we're a legacy act, so be it. And I'll wear that as a badge of honor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Like, one of the standards here on the show is, can you sing people into love? We had Taylor Dane on the show. She absolutely does that, and her songs become people's songs. And you guys, for sure. I mean, people go to your show, like I said, they're spilling drinks, they're having a great time, they're dancing. If they're allowed, they're probably smoking a cigarette on the dance floor, and they're just gone. You just take them out of the room. And I don't know an artist on the planet, especially a musician, who wouldn't want that kind of a legacy. So be a legacy act, a legacy of fucking getting people together and having a great time and falling in love. Fuck, man, that's a great legacy.
Yeah,
it's a great feeling, and to even meet people that say, hey, I had a really bad time in my life and your music got me through it, or I was on a deployment for 6 months and your music got me through it. That's the reward. And also just getting onto the club and seeing people, strangers, dancing or high-fiving each other. It's priceless.
Yeah. The flip side is a band like Jet. They come out, they have an enormous hit. They're just everywhere, playing during the Super Bowl and then gone. And all the guys are like, they hate each other. They can't stand the business. They just didn't. You guys have made it a blessing every time you get dropped from a label. You sign a major label deal and it's like everybody's dream to do that. And then suddenly you get dropped from the label and you come back stronger with a better record and you put it out yourself. And all these years later, really what we can look to you guys at, if there's a legacy there, is just the tenacity of just grinding it out.
Well, I'll tell you, we've been dropped like a bad habit from many labels. And when we got dropped, we would high five each other. We were like, we hoodwinked them. They gave us so much tour support so we could go out, open up for Sepultura and Slayer and Iron Maiden, and they're dropping us. Okay, let's do it again.
Yeah.
And, later on around the end of the 90s, when all that fun money for labels dried up, we went with a label, and that deal didn't work out. We had to go to court, and we were awarded our 3 masters back. And at that point, said, let's start our own record label so we can just not play that game anymore. And it was the best business decision we ever made. And it's astonishing to us that to this day, when we'll meet people in the industry, for lack of a better word, they'll say, who you signed to? And we'll say, oh, we put out our own records. And they're like, oh, sorry. As if that's like some kind of desperate ploy. It's like, oh, and here you are bragging like you just signed your band to a 7 album deal.
Yeah.
Of indentured servitude.
Handcuffs. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2020, come on. It's sad, but it's fine. If they feel sorry for us, it's no skin off our back.
Yeah. It's like getting kicked out of a party, getting dropped from a label. It sounds like you guys are just like, yeah, we got ejected. Right on. Let's go to the next one.
A little bit. It was kind of like a wreck shop attitude. We kind of always, we were a lot younger. We had a very antagonistic view towards them. We never looked at them as being a patron.
Yeah.
We were happy to take the tour support. That's what we were really after. Clutch was always hard to market. They didn't know what they were like. Was this a heavy metal band? Is this a punk rock band? We said, we don't know. Just give us a tour support and we'll go on the road. And we worked our asses off in the 90s. And then it paid fruits, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, no label's gone broke because they signed Clutch to a contract. They're like, that was the straw, Clutch.
Yeah, right.
Well, the thing with labels,
they all do fine.
For, the whole model, it was like, okay, we'll sign, 50 bands and 49 of them will not do anything. But that one band will make up for all 49 100-fold with the money that it generates. And we were always one of the 49. And that's all right. Now we're one of one because we have our own record label.
Yeah, but if you look at the 49, how many of the 49 are still around? So really, you might have been, there was the one, and then there were 2 others, and then there were 47. Yeah,
a lot of bands, once the hammer came down, that was the end of it. Yeah. And it's not always because their financial dreams were dashed. Some of them were just like, this is too damn hard. And there might be something else that they're really into, some other career, because that's what it is. And you have to ask yourself, how much time and energy and emotion are you going to dedicate to this? Because if you love it, it's no problem, but you got to have that reflection on dark night of the soul and it's a healthy thing. Even if it doesn't work out the way you thought, if you have a positive mental attitude, you can find something else. Hopefully.
There's a Marine author who writes about post-apocalyptic stories. His name's G. Michael Huff. And he got signed by Penguin or, one of the big publishing houses. And he built an audience up because he's prolific and people love his stuff. And then it just got harder and harder for him to stay tied to these publishing houses because they wanted more and more a cut of the money. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to do this myself. So here's this guy that built this enormous audience, self-publishes, and he gets a bigger cut of the money, and he's directly tied to his fans now, not told that he can't do something or whatever. You guys have figured that model out for yourselves. Is that a viable model for the next band up the road?
I hope so. I mean, like I said, there's still a psychology where you think unless you're signed to a major label, that you haven't succeeded. That's not the case anymore. I mean, especially in this day and age. I will say, I don't envy young bands coming up now because to be heard through the noise of YouTube and Facebook, I can't imagine what that's like. But if you can just break it down to its most rudimentary form, just get on the stage, and still to this day, word of mouth will do all the heavy lifting for you. Be like, oh, I saw this band open up for you. Let's see, they're playing here next week. Let's go. And that person told 3, and those 3 told 3, and all the thumbs ups. No one remembers that. I mean, I don't remember the last thing I looked at on Twitter, but I can tell you what I was wearing when I saw the Bad Brains play in 1988, and I can remember who I was with because it was a a life-changing event, and that's what music is. And to answer your question, I think also fans dig the idea of buying directly from the band. And I think that author you mentioned, his fans like the idea they're buying from him. It's like, it's like buying direct stock and saying, thank you. Here's something of value for something of value with no middle people.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, it does mean something when you go see a performance that moves you. It also means something when you can look at that CD that you bought from the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it does mean something. I think you guys have also in common the prolific attitude with, just churning out music. I mean, you guys have 12 studio albums, 5 live albums.
Something like that.
Something like that. It's a lot of stuff. And a lot of labels are like, hey, slow down. We got to put this out and we got to put it through the machine. And you guys are just trying to deliver for your fans, and they're almost getting in your way.
That was one of the big hangups. And actually, that was the hang up with us. We would go out on the road, and then in 12 months' time, we would have another album's worth of material, and the label would be like, whoa, no, you got to grind it out for another 3 years and do the album cycle. That model that they still use to this day, which really it put a lot of bands through the ringer, just doing shows after show after show when all they really wanted to do was something creative as well. And when we got dropped, we had pretty much an album ready, jam room. It's a really wild, strange record because it was sort of a release in a lot of ways. Like, here's all the weird stuff that we couldn't do a year ago.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been doing pretty much ever since.
Is there a disco album in your future? Just to check that off.
No. No, it's the short answer.
No, but you know what? So you guys, we talked about the go-go influence because you grew up in DC, and the twist you guys put on it is you use a heavier cowbell because that's just meatier and more masculine. And, hey, I think that's great. And I think that's a new twist on, maybe something old. And I don't know where I was even going with that, but I just had to mention that because I love what you guys do there.
Well, we all grew up listening to go-go. You couldn't get away from it in the 1980s.
Yeah.
You loved it or hated it. If you weren't in the mood for it, it was annoying. But if you're in the mood for it, it was the best thing you ever heard. It was the ultimate party rock. Yeah. And I think sometimes people think it's like, wow, what a stretch it is for a band to combine heavy guitar and go-go. The way I look at it is that, Chuck Brown, he started as a rhythm and blues guitar player. He's roughly maybe a few years older than Tony Iommi, who started as a rhythm and blues guitar player.
Yeah.
I would hazard a guess that both those men listened to the same records growing up. They just took them off into two different trajectories. So when you listen to Sabbath, they have a swing that's not that dissimilar from Chuck Brown. If you listen to like dun 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 dun, you could put a go-go beat on that for miles.
Yeah. Damien, who's producing this episode, and he's off stage, he wanted me to ask you about the time you guys were playing the Burning Beard song, and a guy got on stage and literally burnt his beard. Sort of like your guys' moment, like your Trumpian moment. You were like, disinfected.
Yeah. Who doesn't love the scent of burning hair? It really gets people in the mood. Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that.
It's frowned upon.
But tell us what's going on.
Wait a minute, that guy was your neighbor too, right?
Yeah, and if memory serves, he didn't get up on stage, but he lived I had just moved into the neighborhood, and this was 16 years ago. Mm-hmm. And maybe 5 or so years when he became a teenager, he'd kind of like slowly walk by the house with a clutch hoodie on and kind of eyeball me, taking out the trash or whatever, which was odd because he never said a word to me. He was very reclusive. And the first time he ever tried to get my attention was at a show at the 930 Club. And he just kind of came up to the bear. He had a beard at that point, and he just took a lighter, and the thing went. and then he just started, patting it down. Maybe it had a lot of booze in it to add to the flammable aspect. But yeah, he was my neighbor. I guess that story got around.
Yeah. You got all the way to Macedonia, for crying out loud.
So you're not still in touch.
No, his family moved. So hopefully he's not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Tell us what you guys are working on now. What are you guys putting out? How are you staying relevant?
Well, we're doing these digital releases. We had the one come out today, Smoke Banshee, which is a re-recording of a song on Pure Rock Fury. We've got a couple more in the can. We're going to release them throughout the summer. We had already planned to do this before the new year because we knew we're not going to be ready to record a new record probably till the end of the year. We want to keep putting stuff out because you do have to keep people's attention these days. There's a lot to choose from. And that's the record label side of us talking. But because we can't be out on the road, we are doing the streaming thing, which is a learn by doing activity. Yeah. What do they call building the airplane in mid-flight? But it's been fun, and I think we're going to start looking at doing concerts, whether it be free and selling some merch, or maybe a reasonable ticket price for a full length concert. Our landlord still wants his rent and our practice space, so we got to be fair to the fans and also be practical. And I think there is a sweet spot and that we can arrive at. It's just getting there because it's so odd. It's a wild west out there in the streaming world of concerts, and we're prospectors trying to stake our claim at this point. Looking forward to get back on the road supporting a new record. I don't see that probably happening until mid 2021, to be honest.
Wow.
Yeah, I think everyone's hoping that these shows are, best case scenario, we're looking late summer. But there's also a part of me thinking, you know what? It all depends on governments and decisions that are well above our pay grade. Because some government, maybe the United Kingdom says, okay, you can do shows. But then Germany says, no, thank you. No one's allowed to do shows. So what do? You fly all the way over to do one show and then sit around for 10 days and then go to France. It's financially impossible. So, hopefully, things sort themselves out. We're all in the same boat. So we'll just keep doing what we do best.
Yeah. I just got an email before we came on. I had some tickets to go see Ozo Motley in April. And then the April show got rescheduled to June, and the June show got rescheduled to August. And the email I got today is canceled till further notice. So it's like, man, we don't know when this is going to end. We got to figure this out.
Same here. We had a slew of shows for South America that were supposed to be coming up. Yeah. And we had never been to Chile before. And we were really looking forward to this. Those have been rescheduled a year from now.
Wow.
And I have a feeling that's, for practical purposes, that's what people are looking at. We can fill in dates if things open up easy enough, but this, like festivals, insurance companies and municipalities, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. There's a whole time frame you have to work within. It can only move so fast.
Mm-hmm. A lot of moving parts.
Right. When you look back, there's bands like I saw Erasure about 2 years ago, and they were just fantastic. 15 plus albums. Every song is so much fun. It's a hit, whether you know it or not. They're just great at it. And you guys are a lot like that, where you have all these albums, well over 10 albums, ways to play songs, and international audience. You just said you were one of those 49 bands that doesn't get it done.
I don't think
you're fucking touring Europe, South America. I mean, what continent have you not been to besides Antarctica where people don't do shows?
Well, that's another. We were supposed to do a show in South Africa, and that would have been our first time in Africa. That got taken away.
Yeah.
We've played in Japan. We haven't played in China or India or in the Mideast. But we want to play all these places. I mean, it's such a reassuring thing that, you can go around the world And if you watch the news, you think everybody is so completely different that there's no way anyone can get along. But I tell you this, if you put people in a dark room together, listening to music that they enjoy and drinking beer at the same time, you find that's the great equalizer.
Sign me up.
Yeah, it's a universal language. So, those places have been around a long, long time, longer than Clutch. So hopefully we'll be around long enough to be able to see those places and, and jam out, so to speak.
I don't know a ton about Africa, but I do listen to music from all over the place. And when I hear African artists, one of the things that you immediately know when you go from one artist to the next is they don't like varnish down there. Everything is unvarnished. When you hear those artists, like, man, this guy is bearing his soul. So I would say, hey, you guys have never been to Africa, and I bet you're going to be well received down there because you guys don't have a ton of varnish.
No, we find that to be a distraction. I think that's one of the things Clutch fans have liked about us. And, we're huge Fela Kuti fans. We listen to him all the time on the road. There's a ton of great rock coming out of West Africa right now I was supposed to see some of those bands these past weeks, so they couldn't play, which is a big bummer. So it's life's a buffet. Do it all while you're here. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, you don't just got to eat bananas. You go to the banana bar, you get bananas Foster, you get a chocolate dip banana, you get a frozen banana, a frozen chocolate. There's, I'm totally with you, man. Buffet that shit.
Life with the works.
Yes.
Plus pizza with the banana bar all lined out.
Yep, I got the banana bar. Banana daiquiris.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on. John, do you have any other questions at all?
No, man. I'm just going to say, hey, I'm proclaiming right now I'm a gearhead. So whatever you're doing out here, I'm mustering a crowd.
Well, thank you, John. We'll take the free publicity. That's the best one.
Yeah. And when you come out to Orange County, I'm going to look you guys up, and we're going to go. We're going to hang out, and I'd love to get the whole band on the show the next time.
Yeah. Please do. We'll be back around. Don't know when, but we hit up the Bay Area and LA, Orange County, at least twice a year. So keep an eye out.
Cool, man. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for hanging out with us on this Friday.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, John.
Neil Fallon, everybody.